My stepbrother burst into my home, and my stepmom's unexpected demand left me speechless. Growing up, life was simple. It was just my dad and me. My mom passed away when I was so young that I barely understood it. I have only a few hazy memories of her warm smile, the way she hummed while cooking, and her comforting hugs. After she was gone, it was just us. My dad took on both roles, and honestly, he did a solid job. He was hardworking, the kind of person who'd put in long hours at work but still make time for me. He never missed a school play or a soccer game, and we had our routines. Friday nights were for takeout and movies, and Sundays meant pancakes and trips to the park. Thinking back, those were the best times, even if we didn't have a lot. Things shifted when I was around 12, the year my dad met Lisa. I still remember the first time he brought her home. He was nervous, like a teenager on his first date. Lisa seemed nice enough at first. She smiled a lot, asked me about school, and even brought cookies. I could tell she was trying. And though I missed my mom, I wanted my dad to be happy. For a while, things seemed fine. When my dad married Lisa, I was around 12. I didn't have much say in it, but I did my best to go along. However, it quickly became clear that Lisa's son Ethan was the favorite. No matter what he did, it was always excused, while I had to stay in line. Ethan was one of those people who floated through life without a care. He'd rarely keep a job for long, constantly avoiding responsibilities, and Lisa would make excuses for him. "He's just figuring things out," she'd say, "or he'll find his way." Meanwhile, I was expected to be responsible, getting good grades, helping around the house, basically the opposite of Ethan. But it wasn't just about chores and school, it was how differently Lisa treated us. If I messed up, even a bit, I'd get grounded or lose privileges. But Ethan, he'd break curfew, skip school, or blow off family plans, and Lisa would just brush it off with a "boys will be boys." What really got to me was how my dad seemed oblivious to it all. He tried to be a father figure to Ethan, which I understood, but it sometimes felt like he was so focused on blending our families that he didn't notice Lisa's favoritism. I remember once, after I had saved up all summer doing lawn work and odd jobs for a new bike, Ethan suddenly wanted a new gaming console. Lisa convinced my dad to pitch in, using money he'd saved for something else, and I ended up settling for a cheaper bike. It wasn't just about material things. The favoritism seeped into every part of our lives. During family gatherings or holidays, Ethan would always be the center of attention, cracking jokes and hogging the spotlight, while Lisa would beam at him as if he was the star. Meanwhile, I'd sit there quietly, knowing that no matter what I did, I'd never be the focus like he was. One of the most frustrating parts was how Ethan always seemed to charm his way out of trouble. Once in high school, he was caught sneaking out late at night. Instead of grounding him, Lisa laughed it off, saying he was adventurous. But when I stayed out late once because I lost track of time with friends, I got grounded for 2 weeks. The double standards were absurd. After high school, nothing really changed. Ethan drifted from one dead-end job to the next, quitting whenever things got difficult. He'd be unemployed for months, lounging around Lisa's house while she cooked, cleaned, and treated him like a guest. She'd say he was going through a rough patch or trying to find his passion. Meanwhile, I was working full-time, trying to build a life for myself. Ethan wasn't a bad person. He wasn't mean or spiteful, just lazy. He lacked any real drive, and Lisa's constant coddling only made it worse. She was always there to bail him out, whether it was covering his rent when he couldn't pay or making excuses for his latest job loss. I lost track of how many times she asked me to help him out, lend him money, or let him crash at my place. Every time, I'd remind her that Ethan needed to stand on his own. Once, I even tried talking to him directly. I told him he needed to step up, find something he cared about, and stick with it. He just shrugged and said, "I'll figure it out eventually." That was always his answer: eventually, never now. It was so frustrating to watch, but what could I do? Lisa wasn't going to change, and Ethan wasn't going to grow up as long as she kept enabling him. What made it worse was that Lisa never saw anything wrong with how she treated us. In her mind, she was just being a good mom, looking out for her son. But to me, it felt like she was undermining everything I'd worked for. I had to fight for every bit of success, while Ethan drifted along, knowing Lisa would always be there to back him up. My dad noticed the favoritism. Of course, he wasn't oblivious, but to keep the peace, he usually stayed quiet. I think he hoped things would even out eventually, that Lisa would come around and treat us equally. But that never happened. Instead, her favoritism became more obvious, and the tension in our house became something I couldn't ignore. One of the hardest parts was the isolation I started to feel. The house, which once felt safe, had turned into a battlefield. I was always tense, waiting for the next unfair punishment or the next time Lisa would defend Ethan while throwing me under the bus. It went beyond small things like chores or who got the last piece of cake. It was the constant reminder that, to Lisa, Ethan came first. Even though I tried to focus on my own life, it was hard not to feel the weight of it all. My dad did his best to support me, but I could tell it was wearing him down too. He wanted to keep our family together and make this new life work, but it was obvious that things were off balance, and it wasn't improving. By the time I was a teenager, I was counting down the days until I could move out. I didn't dislike my dad, far from it, but the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a place I had to endure, somewhere I didn't truly belong. When I finally left, it was a relief. I got myself a tiny apartment, started working, and began building a life on my own. It wasn't easy, but it was my life. I didn't have to deal with Lisa's favoritism or Ethan's constant issues. I could finally breathe. Fast forward a few years, and life took an unexpected turn. My dad passed away. It wasn't sudden. He had been sick for some time, but that didn't make it any easier. Losing him felt like losing the last connection to those simpler times when it was just us against the world. After the funeral, the issue of the will came up. I wasn't expecting much. My dad had always worked hard, but we weren't wealthy. Still, he left me a modest inheritance to help me move forward. It wasn't enough to change my life completely, but it was a start, a chance to get ahead. With that inheritance, I made a choice. I was tired of barely getting by, living in cramped apartments, and always feeling like I was a step behind. I wanted something more, so I started looking for a place in the city, a home I could finally call my own. Finding the right spot wasn't easy. The city is expensive, and it felt like an endless search. But after weeks of looking, I found a sleek, modern apartment in a great neighborhood with everything I wanted: space, light, and a view that made me feel like I was on top of the world. Using part of the inheritance for a down payment, along with my savings and a loan, I made it happen. Moving in was surreal. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over my life. This was my space, my new beginning. I thought that with my dad gone and a new place to focus on, I could finally leave the past behind. But as I stood in that new apartment, looking out at the city lights, I couldn't shake the feeling that my fresh start might come with strings attached. Little did I know, the past wasn't finished with me. So there I was, settling into my new place, finally feeling like I was starting to build a life away from all the family drama. Things were quiet, and for the first time I could relax. But of course Lisa wasn't about to let me have that peace for long. One day she called and said she wanted to meet up, saying it was important and that we needed to talk face to face. I figured, okay, maybe she had finally accepted that I wasn't going to take Ethan in and just wanted to clear the air one last time. I wasn't thrilled about seeing her, but I agreed, thinking it would be easier to just get it over with. We arranged to meet at a cafe near my place, a nice spot with good coffee and a relaxed atmosphere. I got there early, found a table by the window, and waited. About 10 minutes later, Lisa walked in, but she wasn't alone. Ethan was with her. Seeing him made my stomach drop. This wasn't going to be a simple chat. Lisa sat down first, giving me a strained smile like she was trying to be polite, but it was clear she had an agenda. Ethan slid into the seat next to her, looking as disinterested as ever. Once they were settled, Lisa jumped right in. "Thanks for meeting with us," she began, like we were at some kind of business meeting. "I wanted to give Ethan a chance to talk to you directly." I just stared at her, not saying anything, waiting to hear whatever she was about to throw at me. Ethan didn't say anything at first, just picked at the sleeve of his hoodie and avoided eye contact. Lisa kept going, leaning in slightly as if she were about to reveal some big secret. "Ethan's in a tough spot right now," she said. "He really needs a place to stay, and your family. I just don't understand why you're being so stubborn about this." I could feel my frustration rising. "Lisa," I replied, keeping my voice steady, "we've talked about this. I can't take Ethan in. I've got my own life to handle, and I can't have him staying at my place." Before Lisa could answer, Ethan finally spoke up, mumbling, "It's just for a little while. I'll get back on my feet. I promise." That was rich. He'd made that promise so many times before, and it never meant anything. I sighed and rubbed my temples. "Ethan, I don't have anything against you personally, but this isn't just about giving you a place to stay. You need to sort things out for yourself, man. You can't keep relying on other people to fix things for you." Lisa cut in, her tone sharp. "Your father would have wanted you to help. He always believed in family, and I can't believe you're turning your back on us." That stung. Bringing Dad into it was a low blow, and she knew it, but I wasn't about to back down. "My dad also believed in hard work and standing on your own," I replied firmly. "I've worked hard to get where I am, and I'm not about to throw that away because you think I owe Ethan something." The conversation grew heated. Lisa started going on about how Ethan had no one else, how I was being selfish, and how I was letting the family down. Ethan just sat there, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, which honestly made me even angrier. If he wanted help, he could at least act like he cared about the conversation. Then Lisa dropped the bombshell she'd clearly been holding on to for the right moment. "If you don't help, I'll have to take legal action," she said coldly. "You used part of the inheritance for that apartment, so technically Ethan has a right to it," Lisa claimed, which made my blood pressure spike. "Are you serious?" I shot back. "You're really planning to drag this into court just to make me let Ethan stay with me?" Lisa didn't even blink. "I'm only doing what's best for my son," she said, as though it was the most logical thing in the world. I couldn't believe it. She was willing to tear our already tense relationship apart just to force this on me. I stood up, grabbing my jacket. "Fine, Lisa. If that's how you want to play it, go ahead. But don't expect me to roll over and let you walk all over me with that." I stormed out of the cafe, leaving them behind. I was fuming, stunned by the lengths Lisa was willing to go. The whole situation felt like a setup from the start, like they'd planned this ambush together. Worst of all, I knew this wasn't the end. Lisa wouldn't give up that easily, and Ethan would ride this out as long as possible. On my way home, I kept replaying the conversation in my head, thinking about all the different ways I could have handled it. But deep down, I knew that with Lisa, there was no winning. She'd always find a way to twist things in her favor. By the time I reached my apartment, I was mentally and emotionally drained. I dropped onto the couch, staring out at the city lights, trying to figure out my next move. One thing was certain, though this fight was far from over. After the ambush at the cafe, I hoped maybe, just maybe, Lisa would take the hint and back off. But no, just a couple of days later, I received an email from my dad's old lawyer. It was one of those "we need to discuss something important" emails that never bring good news. I figured Lisa had stirred something up, but I didn't expect what followed. Mr. Davis, the lawyer, asked me to visit his office to discuss a matter concerning my late father's estate. It felt strange. I thought my dad's estate had been settled ages ago, but out of curiosity I went anyway. When I arrived, Davis wasted no time. "Michael," he said, "your stepmother has raised concerns about how you used the inheritance for your apartment. She's claiming that your stepbrother has a legal right to part of it." I almost laughed. "Are you serious?" "Lisa's really trying to pull that," I asked, struggling to stay calm. Davis nodded, looking grave. "She argues that because part of the apartment was bought with inheritance funds, Ethan has a claim. If this goes to court, there's a possibility a judge might agree." I'm no lawyer, but even I knew how ridiculous that sounded. "Davis, the inheritance was split fairly. I used my share, plus my own savings and a loan, to buy this place. Ethan received his share, and what he did with it is his choice." "That's true," Davis said, leaning back thoughtfully. "But family disputes can be tricky. Her case may be weak, but if she pushes it, it could become a headache." Just what I needed, a legal mess, courtesy of Lisa. I left Davis's office feeling like I'd been sucker punched. I couldn't believe she was ready to take this to court just because I refused to let Ethan stay with me. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Lisa had always been manipulative, but this was a new low. She was actually going to play dirty. I decided it was time to fight back. The next morning, I called a lawyer a friend had recommended, someone experienced in estate disputes. If Lisa wanted a fight, I wasn't going to let her walk over me. When I met with my new lawyer, Sarah, she got straight to the point. "Michael, do you have documentation showing how the apartment was paid for?" she asked. Yes, I have all the receipts, bank statements, everything, I replied. The inheritance only covered about 10% of the cost. The rest came from my savings, and alone. Sarah nodded, satisfied. Good, that will help us. But we'll need to look a bit deeper to avoid surprises. The word surprises stuck with me with Lisa. There were always surprises. And sure enough, one popped up sooner than expected. A week later, Sarah called me to her office. Michael, she said, I found something interesting while reviewing your father's estate records. What kind of interesting? I asked, bracing myself. It appears there are assets that were never disclosed during the initial settlement, investments, property, accounts your father owned, but that Lisa didn't report when the estate was divided. I sat there, stunned. Wait, are you saying Lisa hid assets from me? That's what it looks like, Sarah replied. If these assets were part of your father's estate, they should have been included in the inheritance split. But Lisa claimed them as her own. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Lisa had always been shady, but this was next level. She had hidden a significant portion of my dad's wealth for herself, and now she had the nerve to come after my apartment. What do we do now? I asked, my mind racing. We have two options, Sarah replied. We can file a claim to contest the original estate settlement, which could lead to a long court battle, or we can use this as leverage to get Lisa to back off. I didn't hesitate. Let's go after her, I said. If she wants to play dirty, fine, but she's not getting away with this. Over the next few weeks, things got intense. Sarah and her team gathered all the evidence, and it turned out Lisa had been sitting on a small fortune, investments, a rental property, even a few substantial bank accounts, all hidden from me when the estate was divided. Meanwhile, Lisa continued trying to push her claim on my apartment, even getting a few family members involved, sending messages about how family should stick together and Ethan needs your help. It was all nonsense, and I wasn't buying it. Finally, the day came when Sarah filed the claim. It was official. We were going after Lisa for concealing assets. The look on her face when she found out was priceless. She hadn't seen it coming, and for once, she didn't have a quick comeback. But I knew this was far from over. Lisa was a fighter, and she wouldn't go down without a fight. Still, I felt a sense of relief. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't just reacting to her games, I was taking control. As we prepared for the legal battle ahead, I couldn't help but reflect on how things had reached this point. Lisa had always been about control, making sure Ethan's life was smooth, and now she was ready to tear our family apart to keep it that way. But I wasn't the same kid who had to put up with her nonsense. Back then, I had my own life and my own space, and I wasn't about to let her ruin that. This was my battle, and I was ready for it. After all the investigating, filing of claims, and back and forth in court, everything was finally reaching a breaking point. Lisa had been exposed, caught red-handed hiding assets from my dad's estate. I thought catching her in that lie would be the end of it, but of course things weren't that simple. Once word spread that I was taking Lisa to court, the family panicked. Suddenly, everyone had something to say about my actions. Why can't you just let it go? Or she's your stepmom, you should be helping her, not dragging her to court, sure, because she was always such a saint, right? I couldn't believe how fast they all jumped to her side. Most of these people hadn't bothered with me for years, but now they were blowing up my phone, accusing me of tearing the family apart. It was hard not to feel a bit isolated. I mean, it's not like I enjoyed the drama, I just wanted to live in peace in my own place, without Lisa and Ethan trying to weasel their way in. But no, suddenly I was the villain for standing up for myself, and it was exhausting. The court dates were grueling. Each time I stepped into that courtroom, it felt like walking into a battlefield. Lisa sat there with a smug expression, acting like she was untouchable. She even had the audacity to throw pitying glances my way, as if I were some lost child she had to put up with. But Sarah, my lawyer, was relentless. She tore through Lisa's excuses effortlessly. Lisa's entire defense was built on lies, and it showed. When Sarah revealed the hidden assets, the judge's reaction said it all. It was clear they weren't buying Lisa's sob story about accidentally overlooking those investments and accounts. The final decision came down in my favor. Lisa was ordered to pay up what she owed from the hidden assets, and the judge dismissed her absurd claim that Ethan had any rights to my apartment. It felt like an enormous weight had been lifted, and for the first time in a long while I felt like I could breathe. But the fallout didn't end there. After the ruling, Lisa and her little fan club of family supporters went into overdrive, spreading rumors about me, painting me as greedy and money-hungry. I even got messages from distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years, all asking why I was treating Lisa so badly. It was frustrating, but at the same time I didn't let it get to me. I knew the truth. Lisa had tried to scam me, plain and simple, and now that she'd lost, she was doing everything she could to save face. I wasn't going to let her nonsense get to me. I had more important things to focus on. But then Ethan showed up. I hadn't seen him since the ambush at the cafe, so finding him on my doorstep was a surprise. He looked worn out, like he hadn't slept in days, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low and uncertain. I wasn't in the mood for another guilt trip, but I let him in. We sat down, and he started telling me how Lisa had kicked him out after losing the case. She was selling the house and didn't want him around anymore. He was desperate and needed a place to stay. Before he could dive too far into his sob story, I cut him off. "Ethan, we've been over this. I can't help you. You need to figure this out on your own," he nodded, looking defeated. "I know, man. I don't have anywhere else to go." Despite everything, it was hard to hear that. I didn't hate Ethan. He wasn't a bad person, just lazy and too used to Lisa bailing him out. But I couldn't be the one to save him. If I let him stay, it would only continue the cycle of him relying on someone else to solve his problems. "I can't let you stay here," I said firmly. "You need to find another solution." He didn't argue. He just stood up, thanked me for listening, and left. It was the most mature conversation we'd ever had, which, honestly, was a bit sad. After that, things finally began to settle down. Lisa faded into the background, likely busy trying to salvage her reputation, and the family stopped hounding me, realizing they wouldn't change my mind. I finally had peace, but the whole experience left a scar. I didn't trust people the way I used to. Seeing how Lisa had manipulated everyone and turned them against me showed just how quickly things could go wrong. It was a harsh lesson, but one I wouldn't forget. In the end, I came out stronger. I stood up for myself, defended what was mine, and didn't let anyone walk over me. It wasn't easy, and it was far from enjoyable, but it was necessary. Now I could focus on living my life the way I wanted, free from the constant shadow of family drama. As for Ethan, I have no idea where he ended up, but I hope he figured things out. Maybe getting cut off was the wake-up call he needed, or maybe not. Either way, it was no longer my responsibility. I had done my part, and now it was time to move forward. Update: a few months passed since the court ruled in my favor, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, my life was calm. No more constant calls from Lisa, no guilt trips, no surprise visits. I had finally settled into a routine, focusing on myself and my new life in the city. The weight of all that family drama was starting to lift. But as life often goes, peace is rarely permanent. One evening I was lounging on the couch, halfway through a movie, when my phone buzzed. I figured it was just another spam call or a random notification, but when I checked, I saw her name, Lisa. My first instinct was to ignore it. After everything she put me through, what could she possibly want now? But something, maybe curiosity or some lingering sense of responsibility, made me answer. "Hello," I said, keeping my tone neutral. There was a pause on the other end, before her voice finally came through, softer than I'd ever heard it. "Michael, it's me, I know," I replied, a bit coldly. "What do you want?" Lisa. Another pause. This wasn't the usual confident, manipulative Lisa I was used to. She sounded defeated. I need your help," she finally admitted. I let out a sigh. Of course, she needed help. She always needed something. Help with what? I asked, trying to keep my tone steady. "My life's fallen apart since the court case," she said, her voice shaky. "The house. It's gone. I had to sell it. The money's almost gone too, Michael. I have nothing left." I stayed silent, letting her words sink in. Part of me wanted to feel smug, to tell her this was exactly what she deserved, but there was no satisfaction in hearing her like this. She sounded genuinely broken. "I have nowhere else to turn," she continued. "Ethan's struggling too. I just need a bit of help to get back on my feet." I shook my head, though she couldn't see it. "Why me, Lisa? After everything you've put me through, why would you think I'd help you?" "Because you're the only one who can," she replied quietly. I know I don't deserve it. I know I've been horrible. But I'm desperate there. It was an admission from Lisa that I never thought I'd hear. Her acknowledging any fault didn't erase the years of manipulation, but it was something. "I'll think about it," I replied, keeping my tone distant. "But don't get your hopes up," she thanked me softly, and we ended the call. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. Lisa, the woman who'd spent years making my life difficult, was now asking me for help. It felt surreal. For the next few days, her words replayed in my mind. I didn't owe her anything. She'd created her own mess. But despite everything, I couldn't shake the image of her desperate and defeated. Whether it was a sense of pity or a lingering feeling of responsibility, I couldn't bring myself to entirely turn my back on her. After some thought, I made up my mind. I wasn't about to let her move in or completely bail her out, but I could offer a bit of help, just enough to get her through the next few weeks. I wasn't doing this for her, I was doing it for myself, to close this chapter on my terms. I called her back. "Listen closely, Lisa," I began. "I'll send you a small amount, just enough to cover essentials for a couple of weeks. But that's it. Don't ask for more." She sounded relieved, almost tearful. "Thank you, Michael. You don't know how much this means. Don't make more of it than it is," I warned. "This is temporary. You need to figure out the rest on your own," she promised she would, and I transferred a modest amount, just enough for food and rent for a short period. Afterward, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt lighter, knowing I'd done a decent thing, even if she didn't truly deserve it. But another part of me was bracing for whatever might come next. Lisa wasn't one to let things go easily. The weeks passed and everything stayed quiet. I didn't hear from her again, which was both a relief and a surprise. Maybe she'd actually taken my warning seriously, or perhaps she was too busy dealing with her own issues to bother me. Either way, I was grateful for the space. But deep down, I knew this might not be the end. Lisa had a way of bouncing back, and when she did, it usually meant trouble. Still, I wasn't going to spend my time worrying about her. I had my own life to live, and was finally starting to feel like I could move forward. In the end, I realized that helping Lisa wasn't really about her. It was about me, about showing myself that I could rise above everything, do the right thing, even when it was hard. It didn't erase the past or make everything okay, but it felt like a step in the right direction, and for now, that was enough. Update 2: a few months passed since I helped Lisa out, and, surprisingly, things stayed quiet. I hadn't heard from her or Ethan and assumed they were finally handling their own problems. Life was starting to feel normal again. I focused on work, made new friends, and enjoyed the peace of not constantly worrying about the next wave of family drama. Then one afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Lisa. I stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. Curiosity got the better of me, and I picked up. "Michael," she began, her voice steady but softer than usual. "I have something for you," I sighed, already feeling that familiar tension creep back in. "Lisa, if this is another request for help, it's not," she interrupted. "It's a letter from your father that stopped me cold." "A letter? What are you talking about?" She took a deep breath. "I found it while packing. It was hidden in one of his old boxes. It's addressed to you, and I think you should have it." I didn't know what to say. A letter from Dad after all this time? Part of me was skeptical, wondering if this was just another one of Lisa's manipulations. But something in her tone seemed different, even genuine. "Okay," I said finally. "Where can we meet?" We decided on a neutral location, a park near my place. When I arrived, Lisa was already there, sitting on a bench, holding a small, worn envelope. Without a word, she handed it to me, her expression unreadable. I took it, unsure of what to expect. "Thanks," I said quietly. She nodded. "I'll leave you to it," and with that, she walked away. No drama, no guilt trips, nothing. I sat on the bench, staring at the envelope for a moment before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. The handwriting was unmistakably my dad's, strong, deliberate strokes. I unfolded the letter and began to read. "Dear Michael, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer around, and for that, I'm sorry. There are so many things I wish I could have told you in person, but life doesn't always give us that chance. First, I want you to know how proud I am of you. You've always been strong, independent, and kind. I know things haven't been easy, especially after your mom passed, but you've carried yourself with grace and strength. I'm sorry I wasn't always there for you in the way you needed. When I married Lisa, I hoped it would bring us all closer, give you a family again. But I know it didn't turn out that way. I saw the struggles, the unfairness, and how differently you were treated. I should have done more to protect you, to stand up for you. That's my biggest regret. The inheritance wasn't just about money, Michael. It was my way of trying to give you a chance at the life you deserve. I wanted you to have a fresh start, an opportunity to build something for yourself without the weight of the past holding you back. I knew Lisa would look after Ethan, but you needed someone to look out for you too. I hope the money helped, but more than that, I hope you find peace. I hope you can forgive me for the times I let you down, and maybe someday forgive Lisa. She's not perfect, but she tried in her own way. Take care of yourself, son. Live a life that brings you happiness. That's all I ever wanted for you. With love, Dad. By the time I finished reading, my hands were trembling. The letter hit me harder than I'd expected, bringing up all the emotions I'd tried to bury: anger, sadness, longing. They all came rushing back at once. I sat there for a long time just taking it all in. My dad knew. He'd known how tough things were for me, and he regretted not doing more. That acknowledgement, even after all these years, meant more than I could express. And Lisa, she'd held on to this letter, kept it hidden until now. For once, it felt like Lisa wasn't trying to manipulate or control anything. She simply handed me something that belonged to me, without any strings attached. I didn't feel anger toward her anymore. Maybe it was the letter, or perhaps I'd just grown tired of holding on to all that resentment, but whatever the reason, I felt a sense of release. I could finally let go of the past and look toward the future. Forgiving Lisa, however, didn't mean I wanted her back in my life. I couldn't go back to how things used to be, and I wasn't interested in rebuilding a relationship that had caused me so much pain. This was simply closure. Later that night, as I sat in my apartment with the letter resting on the table in front of me, I felt an unusual sense of calm. My dad's words had given me something I hadn't realized: I needed the freedom to move on. Lisa might still try to reach out occasionally, and maybe Ethan would show up again, but now I knew exactly where I stood. I didn't owe them anything, yet I also didn't need to carry the weight of our past anymore. I carefully folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. It was part of my journey, a reminder of where I'd come from, but it no longer defined where I was headed. For the first time in ages, I felt like I could genuinely move forward, and that was enough.